Welcome everyone today and welcome Omar Sakr. How are you today, Omar?
Yeah, I'm all right, mate. I'm not not amazing. I never am with two kids, under three, and I'm just tired all the time, basically. But otherwise, I'm okay.
I just wanted to speak to you about your sort of upbringing to begin with and where you're from. I sort of read around the traps that you were raised in Western Sydney and your Turkish Lebanese combo there.
Yeah, that's about right. My mum was born in Lebanon, and my father was born in Turkey, and I was born in Liverpool. Bit different, but yeah, I grew up there all around Lanier, Casula, Preston's area. Went to Liverpool Boys High and survived that, which is good. And then yeah, went to uni, got 2 degrees, and have now published 5 books.
Growing up in Western Sydney, I mean, it's quite similar to sort of the upbringing that I had. I don't want to presume anything, but in the north of Melbourne, it was a kind of,
Yeah,
it was a sort of life that had a lot of interesting bike rides, bumping into a lot of different people from different communities and making friends sort of at that coalface in the streets sometimes out the back of a Commodore, wherever it was, trying to sort of create this kind of cross thatch that was the melting pot of post Whitlam Australia. I love speaking about this to people and sharing the experience. You spoke about the violence that was ever present in your life growing up, and you have written about the challenges that you faced with poverty and crime growing up. Do you feel that, many of your perspectives, your writing on Gaza, for example, do you think a lot of it is defined by your upbringing?
yeah, absolutely. I think that's true for everyone. I mean, it's how we started this conversation. You were talking about your upbringing, and how that shapes your worldview. Um, and certainly, I was aware from a very young age that I was racialized and that I was other, and that had um, an impact. And Palestine was always present, um, even growing up. You know, my family's very fractious, I'll say. Like they're always feuding, always arguing. This is one of my like core memories is every family gathering. Um, it's always loud because Arabs, but also genuinely arguing and or feuding. And the only time, like really one of the only times I ever saw them in agreement on something was when Palestine was on the news, when something was happening with respect to Israel. And there would be like a universal, this is fucked. This is horrible. I remember taking note of that as a kid, just being like, this is different. This is a point um, that actually unifies the family. Um, so yeah, I think for sure everything that I experienced growing up has impacted my thinking and my writing. But I wouldn't say that violence determines what I write. Actually, I would say that, and this is gonna sound a particular type of way. It's gonna sound a particular type of way, but love defines my writing because everything that I do when I come back to violences that have been done to me by my family in particular, um, I approach with uh, a tenderness that I never really experienced in life. And so I would say that I'm not trying to replicate the brutalities that I experience or witness, um, but actually to use my writing to find a way past them or through them.
Which one's better, past or through?
Yeah. Uh, as soon as I said it, I was just like, um, I don't know. I think it's what you can manage. I think if the best way would be through, meaning fully reckoning with what it was and what happened. To what degree that's possible is going to differ in each circumstance. Um, and but sometimes you got to go past it and not get stuck in it, which is a possibility in trying to go through.
Totally. What is it? The bear. We're going on a bear hunt, right? Um, we have to
Yeah.
go through it. Uh, you mentioned violence, not being the definitive factor. It's actually love. And I come from a family, a big Irish kind of butcher family where there was a bit of violence in there as well. And I often wonder if, experiencing violence and seeing it actually helps you sort of find that love or cling onto it and appreciate it somewhat more when you can get aligned to it. I wonder sometimes if that violence helps to define our trajectory through love, essentially. And if we're seeing that in the people of Gaza today, every day we see how big these hearts are on the ground, despite the conditions there. So do you feel that's the case?
I think what we've seen from Palestinians, broadly speaking, uh, is indescribable. Um, I don't know that I necessarily or have a reference even point to get to it. Um, the degree of faith and love and community displayed by people who are even now 600 days into the genocide, digging through rubble to find people, to find children, picking up pieces of kids, collecting them to bury them, um, looking after even the animals. I've seen so many different accounts of care for cats and dogs and birds um, in the midst of a starvation campaign. Um, I think we focus a lot on the atrocities and the evil because we've never seen carnage like this, 600 days of carnage like this, um, 600 days of inhumanity. On the other side of that, I would say I don't know that I've necessarily ever seen humanity like this, love like this. And so I guess speaking to my own experience growing up, um, I think people who experience violence, they don't all come out of that more empathetic. Some of them go the other way. Um, and some of them shut down and they close off and they go, um, I went through much worse. So what you're going through is nothing. And therefore, they justify even the cruelties that they're uh, and the violences that they're dealing out
Are we
to
seeing are we
others.
seeing that with Israel right now?
Yeah, to some degree, to some degree. And I say some degree because obviously there's the Zionist justification of the Holocaust happened, therefore, um, we're justified in doing anything and everything to not experience that again. And obviously that justification is nonsense um, for a number of reasons. Number one, Palestinians didn't do it, didn't have anything to do with the Holocaust. And uh, Number two, Zionism began decades before the Holocaust, began as a political and explicitly colonial project decades before that. Uh, and certainly they use the argument on a more granular level that October 7th justifies anything that comes after it, that it was such a unique evil or barbarism that anything that follows that they do in response is somehow justified, which is equally nonsense. Um, because on numerous occasions they've done far worse to Palestinians than what was done by Hamas um, on October 7th. And so to utilize that logic is to say, well, then they too were justified in what they did. And you can't have it both ways. Like, which is it? And so in response, some will say, um, and you can't equate the two, right? They insist on this. Politicians in particular insist on this. You cannot equate the militia with a democratic government, is what they say. Uh, and that too is just an absurdity, as if to say, well, because this set of people uh, were elected at the ballot, their violence is somehow more acceptable than this political movement uh, with a militia. At the same time, they'll also then point to Hamas being elected by the people of Gaza in 2005 and say, well, then every Palestinian is responsible for every single action that a Hamas fighter took. So there's no coherency to the various logics that they use.
Their pain and suffering has been weaponized over an 80-year period, I mean, a 100-year period, um, to sort of implement, Theodor Herzl's dream in Israel. And its government was essentially founded by militias. So we're looking at a nation that runs on a different kind of a messaging than most other nations of the organized earth. Do you feel that they've codified this sort of weaponization throughout their society, and that Israeli society is essentially based on meting out violence? Is there another way it could survive without it?
Yeah, there's a couple of things in there. One is that many Zionists, um, well, let's just talk about the fact that Holocaust survivors were treated abominably by Israel. You would think that if it were true that the pain and the suffering were all that mattered to them, that they were impacted so much by it, that they would uh, honor the people who survived it. And frequently, the people who survived, who had direct experiences of the Holocaust, were vocal anti-Zionists and were critical and have been throughout the history of the modern state of Israel, uh, of its brutal colonial apartheid practices, and have subsequently been shunned. And you have people like Norman Finkelstein, who talks about his parents and their experience in the Warsaw Ghetto, and how it's because of those experiences and because of that awareness uh, that he finds it especially intolerable that anyone would try to use uh, their suffering as a pretext to oppress another people. Uh, just to say again, there's multiple paths, I guess, in response to violence and to fear. But many Zionists had a view of uh, the Jews who suffered so cruelly in the Holocaust, and the view was that they were uh, pathetic. The view was that they needed to create a militaristic culture that was explicitly violent, right? So as to never uh, be so weak. It's their language, not mine. Their characterizations, not mine. Um, as to suffer an experience like that.
And do you think that the plight of Palestinians have been the fuel? Can Israel survive without burning this fuel, without the need to perpetuate endless war in a messianical biblical kind of language that looks at Amalek and clutches at shadows? I mean, are we looking at like a nation that's so wounded and so rabid that it's essentially going to keep attacking until something stops it? Or is there a way in this organized League of Nations somewhere on this planet that we're going to be able to stop this entity because it's insatiable?
Yeah. I think so. You're asking if they ethnically cleanse Palestine, will that be enough? Will they stop? The answer is no. They've been very explicit about this. One of the most frustrating things about the past 2 years is that Israeli politicians in particular, really will just tell you what they want,
Yeah.
what they want to achieve. And Western politicians and media entirely ignore it, do not report what they're actually saying, what they have been saying for decades. Um, and one of those things is the project of Greater Israel includes Lebanon, includes Syria, and includes even parts of Jordan, and they want all of it. Um, and so another aspect to, well, what happens if they succeed in accomplishing the genocide and ethnic cleansing of Palestinians? Um, One thing that they've been very clear about in their messaging is that they are a bulwark of the Western world in uh, the Arab world. And they describe themselves as a shield. And they're basically keeping the terrorists at bay from um, all of you lovely white people in the West, right? They're using the language and the framework of the war on terror, which has been built by America over the past few decades, with this precise thing in mind. What happens when the subjugation of the Palestinian people is complete, if such a thing is possible? If such a horror and such a tragedy is allowed to occur, how can they keep going? This is how. Terrorism, the Muslims need to be stopped. It's not just uh, Hamas, it's Hezbollah, it's, uh, and of course, you can name various little groups, but then ultimately Iran, right? And they'll just keep going like that.
And then next
Is there,
it'll be Pakistan after that if they took Iran.
yeah. And then to your question earlier, which was, is there another way? Is there another way? Do they have to be so violent and dominate um, the way that they have been doing? Um, yes, of course, right? We can look to South Africa and its apartheid as an example, um, that with sufficient pressure, actual material pressure, you can, uh, from within and without, you can change the situation. And Palestinians have been calling for this for decades, not two states. One, two states is not possible, has not been possible for some time. one state with equal rights for all.
And we are looking at a cohort of, Israeli punters who overwhelmingly support more action in Gaza. Think that at times the Netanyahu government's been too soft. Who would have thought that Netanyahu is the moderate in this situation, putting together this strange coalition of people? Who would have thought that the biggest motivator for Netanyahu to keep doing what he's doing are the Ben Gvirs and Smotriches to his sort of right? Um, it often just feels sort of like when you see the way our political class in Australia speaks rationally about Israel and the way it can sort of, entertain this status quo, it's kind of it feels like it's going off some kind of muscle memory from a couple of decades ago that's, been sort of, integrated into the Australian political class. And it's very outdated. It probably hasn't been updated since Hamas got into power in 2005. And we're seeing these massive disconnects between reality and what these sort of auto sort of prompt responses from our politicians are. Do you feel that like now with the scale of violence and this kind of end stage ethnic cleansing operation that are going on now, is the weight too strong for like the OECD and the fickle leaders within it? Do you feel that this kind of like this violent sort of ever presence that you speak to about Israel has now been clearly identified and can't be sort of denied as much anymore by the Albanese government, for example?
I think it's always been a fantasy. I think the lines that you're talking about have always been a fantasy. I don't think they've ever been so clearly exposed. But the issue is that there's nothing to stop Western politicians and media from continuing to speak to that fantasy. It's a fiction. It's a narrative, but it's a really well established fiction. Um, and I mean, you don't even see journalists push back effectively against it. Um, so is it going to stop because the reality is so clear? No. People have been talking about the shift that we've seen somewhat in rhetoric from the UK and a couple of other Western countries. Um, but I don't see any. I look at that and I go, well, it doesn't really matter anymore. It doesn't matter anymore because Israel has largely achieved its objective of destroying um, Gaza in its entirety. I think it's 92% of the buildings have been destroyed. And so what we're seeing now and what's going to continue is that rhetoric will continue to shift as the status quo accepts, I guess, that they're no longer really in danger, that the threat of the the threat of it being stopped in any way, shape, or form is gone. So they're now free to kind of try to save face um, as much as possible and kind of continue to gaslight us. Uh, it's really not going to change, man. Like we haven't sufficiently pressured any of our governments. These protest actions have not been enough um, in any way, shape, or form. Electorally, we haven't been able to punish um, politicians sufficiently. Um, and so the message that they take away from that, and we saw that extremely clearly with our recent election, immediately Penny Wong came out and said, well, this vindicates us. You know, we were absolutely right in our every step of every action we took. The public just gave us a big thumbs up as far as Gaza. Now, prior to the election and leading up to it, they did everything they could to dismiss the subject to deny it had any relevance. No, no, no. The election was about cost of living, rah, rah, rah. Only this, only all of these, keep Dutton out, etc. And then immediately afterward, it was, no, you've just told us everything we needed to know, which is that we're fine. This is fine. Everything's okay.
There was a bit of a nya 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 factor going on out of Penny Wong and the crew. I mean, especially how they were leaning into the Greens, the independents, and anyone that for weaponizing Gaza. They were speaking to all of us, to myself, to the Greens, to you, and they were saying, "You guys can go get fucked because you aren't a majority in this country, and you never will be." It was soul destroying for me personally to see that lack of repudiation electorally. And I know, like, unpacking it now, there was a lack of an avenue. That a lot of it was a repudiation of Dutton's super Israel approach. That a lot of people were just kind of, even on the right, the libertarian types are like, why is everyone talking about Israel all the time? This is bullshit. There was that going on the right. I do feel devastated personally, sometimes living in this country, even amongst my own, group of mates and people,
Mm.
and seeing that hip pocket issues and some kind of like shitty social scenario is what people care about more so than this. And dealing with this has been hard for me, and I can't imagine how you feel writing about it. And I wanted to get on to your next, to your writing, the nightmare sequence. And before getting you to sort of maybe go through what that collection's about, I'd also like to ask you what your nightmare sequence is in Australia at the moment.
Oh man. I think we are largely living through it. Um, it is not just a continuation of the norm, but a doubling down on existing cruelties and injustices. It's what we just saw, which is the Albanese government approving the extension of the Woodside uh, fucking
North South, yep.
North, yeah, and for 45 years, and it's Indigenous people still being killed uh, by police. It's the genocide continuing, Australian arms funding continuing, um, still giving the US everything it wants for no fucking reason. I mean, you talked about the hip pocket, this idea, and I'm just like, if it's often said, right, that the political situation is often framed in terms of pragmatism, but it doesn't make sense. Because if economic pragmatism was actually the be all and end all, then there is absolutely no way that we would be okay with the government continuing a $370 billion deal with the US for submarines we're not going to get,
Totally.
for a war with our number one trading partner, which accounts for more than a quarter of our entire international trade. Okay, it doesn't make any sense. The subsidizing fossil fuels doesn't make any sense, and of course, these policies have a huge financial impact, a huge financial impact. Um, and so I just wanted to say that very clearly, that economics is not dictating our political reality. Ideology is. And you talk about this a lot. I see it, the way the obscene and absurd ways that the fossil fuel companies are robbing us blind. Um, so
It's not the fossil fuel companies, it's these gatekeepers that we've elected. We feel like some kind of petro state 40 years ago in another continent. We are looking at a bunch of self-interested politicians that are more concerned about getting a 500 plus $1,000 like empty job for some fossil fuel company after their retirement than they are about the national interest. We are acting like something we're not, and we've been doing it for 50 or 60 years. So yeah, I think
100%.
that's, yeah, that softness, in the political class towards like the national interest, and in the punter is also echoed in our lack of giving a fuck about something like Gaza.
Yeah, there's a couple of things I wanted to say about that. Like you were talking about feeling devastated um, by the lack of care, and of course I feel that. Um, I have felt it for most of my life. The indifference to the more than 300,000 bombs that America has dropped across the Middle East over the past 30 years. Um, you know, the catastrophe in Syria, in Iraq, in Afghanistan. I've seen the incredible indifference or apathy to Arab lives in this country and across the West. So it's not new in this context, but I'll also say that we come away from the election, especially those of us who are like really in the media with like particularly clear narratives that I don't know are always like 100% accurate. Because I ran in the seat of Blaxland as the Greens candidate, and I was going up to people in the uh, early polling and trying to talk to them and trying to give them get a sense of what was going on. Like you would be really surprised how few people were like genuinely aware, not just of the genocide, but Australian involvement in it. Like it was really depressing, just by itself. I guess the degree to which the um, messaging the is controlled um, was genuinely shocking to me. Um, like even in my own community, like I saw some young Arab men who I started to tell them about what was happening in Israel and Australian involvement in it, and how the Greens are against it, and they were just like shocked, like completely surprised, like the message just wasn't out there to the degree um, that it needed to be. So there's that, and then there's also so many people in my community in particular who are completely disenfranchised um, and do not think that voting or that is going to make a difference, is going to change anything, um, and who are traumatized as well, who look at the powers that be and go, it's always going to be like this.
Yeah.
It's a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? I hate it for that reason, but I also understand it because it is happening, despite all the protesting and all the rest of it. But we have to find a way to get through to them and connect them to what they can do and what they can achieve, because it's just a cop out. At a certain point in time, you just try to absolve yourself of blame by saying it's the system's fault. I can't change the system, and at the same time, they're then resentful of you for even trying because it implicates them and their inaction.
I see with immigrants now, new immigrants to Australia, the disconnection between Australia and new immigrant populations could possibly be a lot starker than it was between yourself and my immigrant stories. Due to
Yes.
that end stage neoliberal productivity commission approach to immigration, as opposed to like an actual thought about immigration and how you can actually manage it. So this is a sensitive topic.
100%. I agree with you.
Yep.
Yeah. No, I do actually think that that's happening um, to some degree. And all I'll say about that is, I think a lot of the quote unquote backward attitudes ascribed to my community, and I've written about this before, uh, is actually just what they've learned from the Daily Telegraph,
Yep.
because that's what they read. And that's the extent of it, and not just the Daily Telegraph, but what they're seeing um, on the news. The level of discourse that's allowed in this country, in these newspapers and on Channel 7, Channel 9, Channel 10. Uh, that's what they're taking in, and I just go, well, uh, that's Australia for you. So if anything, you could say that they're becoming more Australian in taking on this particular small-minded, xenophobic attitude, um, which has been really just hammered into the Australian psyche over the past 2 decades of uh, or more of Murdoch's Stop the Boats, LNP, uh, Stop the whatever. Um,
And it's been very effective, 20 years of that
yes.
blanket concentrated. It's warped the minds of, of the collective on both sides of politics. Those who try to like constantly punch their way out of this wet paper bag of like misinformation, and those that kind of wrap themselves in it. And it pervades our society at the granular level and, affects our ability to be able to sort of get out of this mess. I just wanted to speak to you about fear in the arts. Um,
Mhm.
I sort of have been feeling that fear myself as someone who's a writer, not in the art scene so much, but from personal threats to all sorts of things that I've sort of come across. I never thought this would happen. I want to ask you about the fear of artists like yourself, poets and writers, and sort of asking you how you feel as an artist, writing about a genocide, and how other artists are feeling, and how potentially fear may be a limiter here.
Yeah. I'm a little bit surprised that I was able to get the Nightmare Sequence published in this climate of hysterical Zionism and extreme racism. For anyone listening who doesn't know, that's my latest book, which responds to the genocide in Gaza, and the author royalties from sales of this book are being donated to Palestinian charities. We've been able to donate um, $10,000 so far to that. Um, Fear. I'm not feeling fear. I'm feeling rage. So I'm maybe not the best person to speak to about this because I don't care if I am unable to publish another book. If I can self-publish if it comes to it. If you know what I mean? Like I'm not hugely concerned about this, but many people are inhibited by this particular fear. Um, and I would love for them to just let go of it a little bit. Um, I think so much of the infrastructure around the arts in particular has been exposed as, if not meaningless, then fucking close to it. Um, and the value of winning an award, the value of, quote unquote prestige is diminished to the point of nothing when you have politicians canceling artists and canceling fellowships and uh, on the basis of an artist criticizing an apartheid state that is quite literally starving kids and babies to death daily. um, what that does, what that effectively says, is that any artist that they do award, uh, they're awarding on the basis of a complicity in this genocide. They're effectively steeping the arts in the war crimes and crimes against humanity perpetrated by Israel with our aid. Um, and so, what I say then to artists is, why would you want that? Why would you want to be associated with that? Why would you want your art, which for so many of us has an importance, far beyond the income it may or may not generate? Why would you poison that with this blatant association, which politicians and executives on various boards have made incredibly explicit? Like, you might previously have been able to make an argument, right? You might be able to say, publicly funded uh, literary prize or award or whatever. Yes, governments um, are corrupt or commit crimes or are complicit in this or complicit in that, but effectively, public funding comes from all of us, comes from our communities. It's not like Albanese or Tony Burke is handing out money from their pockets to artists, okay? They pretend in some ways that that is the case, but it's public money. It's money generated from our taxes and our labor, and so we're entitled to some of it, um, is what I would say. But you might have been able to say that once upon a time. Right now, though, with these kinds of really stark political interventions that are happening at the state and federal level, um, they're very clearly tying their complicity and support for Israel's genocide um, with artistic projects. And what that says is merit no longer has any role. If it did before, we don't know, but it doesn't have any role to play here. We're going to override uh, expert panels. We're going to override uh, the curators and program directors. Uh, we're going to step in and we're going to silence you. And then you have the billionaires who own Meta and who own uh, these various social media platforms where content creators uh, have built their audiences and make their money, and you have the algorithm being used to suppress content that criticizes the status quo, in particular the genocide. And it's like, you could self-censor and try to fit into this fascistic fucking model. Um, that's not me. That will never be me. Uh, and each person kind of has to make that determination for themselves. I'm not really interested in taking a position where I'm like pointing a finger at anybody who is doing what they have to pay their bills and feed their kids. Um, I am simply articulating what my position is, um, which is that I will always speak out against these injustices.
Omar, what you say there is sort of glaringly obvious. Seeing, the dithering of our artistic, our journalistic class, this whole group of people that are motivated by fear of maybe a quite high Sydney home loan somewhere that they've acquired in recent years or something. Uh, I go out and sort of drag gravel around and cut grass and then come home and write for free every night. My motivations are from this place, and I wouldn't have it any other way. And I can tell that you're probably cut from a similar cloth. That mobility of people has made, voices being able to sort of stick up a little bit. I often wonder about the concentration of media, of arts, and these like these sort of gatekeepers that sort of covet these spaces. And I wonder if what we see here is you don't cut one head off the Hydra and many other artists pop up in other places. This is a kind of removal exercise. There seems to be a small group of vocal people with profiles that are willing to stick their voice out. Like I spoke to Peter Lawler, the sports commentator, who lost his job in Sri Lanka as a test commentator for a couple of retweets. And the way he's been shunted out of the scene is in a way to hide him away and warn everyone else in journalism who's younger than him that if they want to be a sports caller on the radio, they better not talk about this shit ever again. Um, it feels like in the arts world with Gillum and things like that, from the MSO, we're getting the same kind of scenario. In the media with Lattouf, we're getting the same kind of scenario. And God forbid you're young and talented and have a moral sort of fortitude to stand on, because if you do, you're only about half a call away from losing everything. Is this a hopeless position in Australia? And do you think it's unique to us based on our circumstances? And if so, what are ways that artists can rise above this constant kind of wall of censorship that's sort of, bearing down on us?
Yeah, I don't think it's unique to Australia. I mean, we're certainly seeing it happen in America and Canada, and the UK. I do think we have uh, a stronger, in some ways, Zionist lobby. Or maybe it simply feels stronger because we have a smaller industry, um, and they're able to make a lot more noise. But it's certainly happening in several other countries. Um, I think this kind of censorship relies on everyone else taking the cue and self-censoring themselves in order to not be the next Lattouf, um, the next Laylo, Subsabi, whoever. Um, and we really just need more and more people to speak up collectively, because so long as it's individual examples, they're going to just keep picking us off one by one. Um, and eventually, if we're speaking collectively with enough numbers, they're not able to do that. And that means that we really need to be willing to refuse to participate, to walk away. Um, and we just haven't seen that as much as we need to. And for young people uh, looking at this situation, I don't want to say it's hopeless. I don't think it is. I think we all need to be investing in um, making our own spaces, our own publications, um, and not relying on existing structures. At the same time, we can and should be agitating, advocating, and pressuring to create the change within those systems as much as we can. Um, there's many different strategies, and my approach has always been that we have to be taking all of them at the same time, and relying on one over another is like it's pointless. There's too much concentrated power and wealth stacked against us. Actually, we need to be trying uh, multiple strategies simultaneously. But that is really part of my aim in continuing as an artist, in continuing in this industry, is to essentially advocate uh, and apply pressure to change the situation as much as I can. Uh, or failing that, be forced out. Because I'm not going to walk away on my own. Um, I'm not going to abandon the platform or the profile that I've built. Um, I'm going to use it in every possible way to loudly advocate for justice. And they'll either prove themselves to be uh, exactly who I'm saying they are, and get rid of me.
You're choosing to die with your
Yeah,
boots on.
yeah, 100%. That's what I'm saying.
I think there's a few that have sort of echoed this sentiment, and we spoke about Peter Lawler, and a few other folk that have sort of echoed similar things. When confronted with this censorship, this restriction, this kind of pushing aside that happens in this society, a lot of people are deciding to bunker down. I want to ask you about how is this you navigating having your writers workshops cancelled and things like this? Is this a reaction to things like that? Do we need to warn this Zionist entity that this kind of thing makes us go the other way? It doesn't stop us.
Absolutely. And I think that's been happening to some degree um, at the individual level, you know, with artists responding and saying, we're not going to stop. We are going to keep calling for justice. And but we're not really seeing it enough at the institutional level um, with the people who are making decisions based on whose funding they're getting. And we really need to have a much broader and more rigorous discussion about how the arts is funded. Um, and we need to get all of the blood money effectively out of it. And I don't just mean Zionist funders who are interfering to uh, silence dissent, but I also mean fossil fuel companies. I also mean, yeah, any so-called philanthropist really uh, who is trying to artwash uh, their wealth.
Perhaps it's time for an ethical philanthropist register or something like that. Some way of being able to delineate a difference between, where these finances are coming from in the arts, and potentially being able to raise finances into that good kind of pot of money that you're, sort of speaking to.
Yeah, 100%. It's more than that, though. I mean, um, I think, for example, like any Zionist funder who wants to uh, give money to the arts, anybody who's giving money to the arts, in fact, should not be able to make programming decisions or determine who is awarded something on the basis of their donation, which is effectively just them avoiding paying tax. Um, like we're expected to kind of genuflect and be like, thank you for your patronage or whatever the fuck. I hate that attitude. There is that aspect of, how do we ensure that we're getting ethical funding, but then also um, you have this attitude infiltrating the public you infiltrating the government. You have like Victoria saying, we need anyone receiving funding to kind of sign on to this social cohesion pledge, which is ghastly. Like it's fucking awful. What the hell does that mean? Especially,
That like echoes the United States, how the states have to like pledge to Israel or something like that. It's kind of, what the hell is that?
there's literal laws, yeah, in the states that say you have to pledge not to boycott Israel. If you're going to receive funding or something, you're like, well, which fucking country am I in?
That's right. And
Which country am I in?
it
It's
just looks
insane.
so much more disjointed here in Australia too, doesn't it? I mean, with the small population, with the geographical location, just the whole lot of it, just it adds up, and it's incredible. You get to see how the shit gets thrown up into the fan at a period like this. You get to see all that. You get to see exactly how the pie's made, and how ridiculous it is. Omar, I could keep you here all day. I really appreciate you coming in for a chat. And yes, please look out for the nightmare sequence wherever you can. So thank you very much, Omar, for being here.
Ah,